The first time my experiment failed, it killed me. The second time, it ruined the people who stole it. I stood beneath the white competition lights with my hand wrapped around a brass laboratory key, watching 3 former teammates pretend they were not afraid. Across the stage, their machine sat inside a glass safety enclosure, polished until every steel surface gleamed. Cameras hovered over it. Judges leaned forward. A digital countdown glowed above the arena floor. 10 minutes until activation.
9, 8.
My former best friend, Mara Voss, smiled at the audience as though she had invented everything herself. She wore the navy blazer our university reserved for national finalists, the same blazer I had once dreamed of wearing. Professor Adrian Vale stood behind her with one hand resting proudly on her shoulder. The final member of their team, Lucas Pell, kept adjusting the injector line leading into the reaction chamber. He knew. I could tell from the way his fingers trembled. Their experiment would not start. Not because they had assembled it badly. Not because the catalyst had degraded. Not because the software was corrupted or the power supply was unstable. It would not start because the design they had stolen was never complete, and the only person who knew what was missing was standing 20 meters away with the real lab key in her pocket.
Me.
When the countdown reached 5 minutes, Mara glanced across the stage. Our eyes met. Her smile slipped for half a second. That was all I needed. I lifted the key between 2 fingers and let it catch the light. Her face went pale. 3 months earlier, I had woken up screaming on the floor of my childhood bedroom. My mother burst through the door carrying a laundry basket and nearly dropped it on my head.
Elena?
What happened? I could not answer. My lungs were dragging in air that smelled of lavender detergent instead of scorched plastic. My skin was whole. My hands were not burned. There was no blood inside my mouth, no ringing alarm, no bitter metallic taste spreading over my tongue. There was only sunlight, my old desk, and a calendar pinned above the bed. March 4th. I stared at the year. Then I vomited on the carpet. In my first life, I died on August 19th in Laboratory 3 after Professor Vale locked the emergency door from the outside. I remembered every second. The bioreactor had overheated during a private demonstration for a pharmaceutical sponsor. Mara had changed the pressure limits in the control software. Lucas had disconnected the secondary vent. Vale had told me to remain inside and stabilize the culture while he escorted the sponsors to safety. He promised he would open the door. He never did. The last thing I saw through the reinforced glass was Mara holding my laboratory notebook against her chest while Vale guided her away. My research, my equations, my process, my proof that a low-cost bacterial system could manufacture a rare clotting protein at a fraction of the current price. They left me to die and entered the National Innovation Competition 6 weeks later using my work. They won. I knew that because I had watched the ceremony on a television mounted above my hospital bed. I had not died immediately. The chemical burns destroyed my lungs slowly enough for me to see Mara accept the gold medal, Vale announce a licensing partnership, and Lucas tell reporters that the project had been a collaborative effort from the beginning. No one mentioned my name. I died before sunrise the next morning. Then I woke in March, alive, 18 and 7 days away from handing Professor Vale the first working version of my design. My mother thought I had suffered a nightmare. I let her believe it. I spent the morning touching ordinary things. The cold bathroom tap, the chipped rim of my cereal bowl, the soft ears of our old dog, Pippa. Every sensation felt stolen from death. By noon, fear had turned into something cleaner. A plan. In my first life, I had believed intelligence was enough. I thought good work protected itself. I thought evidence mattered automatically, that friendships became loyalty if you invested enough trust in them, and that respected professors behaved like respectable people. Rebirth did not make me wiser. Being murdered did. I returned to Blackridge University the next day, wearing the same gray coat I had worn countless times before. The campus looked smaller than I remembered. Students hurried between brick buildings with coffee cups and backpacks, unaware that they were walking through the scene of my future death. Laboratory 3 occupied the basement of the Hawthorne Science Center. Access required two things: a programmed identity card and a physical brass key. The card opened the main corridor. The key opened the inner chemical storage room, the culture freezer, and the manual override box for the bioreactor. In my first life, Professor Vale had given that key to me because I worked later than everyone else. Then Mara started borrowing it. Then she stopped asking. When I entered the lab, she was sitting on my stool with her shoes propped against the lower cabinet. Her dark hair was pinned in the loose twist she wore whenever she wanted to look effortlessly brilliant. Lucas stood at the whiteboard copying one of my equations into his tablet.
There she is, Mara said.
We thought you'd abandoned us. I looked at her and saw two faces at once: the friend who had shared noodles with me during midnight experiments, and the woman who had carried my notebook away while I burned. My body reacted before my mind did. My stomach tightened. My fingertips went numb. Mara tilted her head. You okay? I smiled. It surprised all three of us. Perfect, I said. I finally understand what I'm working with. Lucas glanced at the board. Good, because Vale wants the updated growth model by Friday. I know. He tapped the equation he had copied. Your oxygen transfer coefficient is wrong. It was not wrong. He simply did not understand why I had adjusted it for the modified chamber geometry. In my first life, I spent 40 minutes explaining it. This time, I shrugged. Then fix it. Lucas blinked. What? If it's wrong, fix it. Mara laughed, but there was a sharpness beneath it. Someone woke up dramatic. I crossed the room and opened my locker. My notebook was exactly where I remembered leaving it, beneath a folded lab coat. I removed it, flipped through the pages, and felt a strange grief. These equations had once been pieces of my soul. Now they looked like evidence at a crime scene. Mara slid off the stool. Vale said we should submit the preliminary competition abstract tonight. I asked. She paused. That single word had not troubled her in my first life because I had been too excited to notice. The project began as my independent research placement. Vale added Mara and Lucas after the first successful protein expression run. By the time the abstract was submitted, my name appeared third. Mara recovered quickly. The team. What team? Lucas stopped typing. I closed the notebook. I never agreed to make this a team entry. Mara's smile thinned. You don't have to agree. Vale supervises the lab. He supervises my placement. He doesn't own my work. The room became very quiet. Then the door opened. Professor Vale walked in carrying 4 coffees and the confidence of a man who had never been told no by someone he considered useful. He was 43, handsome in a careful way, with silver beginning at his temples and a voice donors trusted. In my first life, I mistook his attention for mentorship. Elena, he said warmly. Excellent. I was just looking for you. I'm here. He handed Mara coffee, then Lucas, then set one beside my bench without asking how I took it. We have an opportunity. The competition committee has agreed to review late-stage biomedical entries. Mara has drafted an abstract based on our clotting protein platform. I repeated. Vale's eyes sharpened, but his smile remained. Science is collaborative. So is theft, apparently. Lucas inhaled too quickly. Mara stared at me. Vale set down the final coffee. Perhaps we should speak privately. No, I pulled the brass key from my coat pocket and placed it on the bench between us. We should speak clearly. His gaze dropped to the key. That key was the center of everything. Access.
Control. Opportunity.
In my first life, I handed it over whenever they asked because I thought generosity proved I belonged. This time, I closed my fingers around it again. Laboratory 3 is assigned to my research placement until the end of term, I said. The storage room contains cultures registered under my project number. The freezer inventory is signed in my name. Starting today, nobody uses the inner lab without me present. Mara laughed once. You cannot be serious. I looked at her. Try me. Vale's voice softened. That was how he sounded when he wanted someone to mistake a threat for concern. Elena, you seem distressed. Take the week off. Leave the key with me, and we'll preserve your work until you feel more stable. There it was. The first attempt to remove me. I had expected it. I still felt the old fear rise through my chest. Then I remembered the hospital television. Mara's medal. Vale's interview. My name missing from my own life. I slipped the key into my pocket.
No, I said.
I think I'll stay. Vale did not argue in front of them. Men like him rarely showed anger where it could be witnessed. He simply nodded, picked up the untouched coffee, and said, "We will revisit this when you're thinking more rationally." The moment he left, Mara stepped close enough for me to smell her citrus perfume. "What is wrong with you?" she whispered. I wanted to tell her that I had watched her abandon me behind reinforced glass. I wanted to describe the blue emergency lights flashing across her face as she chose my notebook over my life. Instead, I met her eyes and asked, "Do you remember the first night we worked here?" Her expression flickered. "Of course. You said you were terrified everyone would discover you didn't belong. That was 2 years ago. I told you I'd never let anyone make you feel disposable." Mara's jaw tightened. "I meant it," I said. "You didn't." For one dangerous second, she looked guilty. Then Lucas moved behind us, and the moment vanished. "You need sleep," she said. "And when you've calmed down, you're going to apologize." She walked out with Lucas following. He did not look at me. As soon as the outer door closed, my knees buckled. I gripped the bench until the wave passed. Courage looks clean from a distance. Up close, it is often nausea, shaking hands, and the decision not to run while every nerve orders you to. I locked the inner lab. Then I began dismantling my own future. The working process depended on 6 stages. Anyone with my notebook could reproduce the first 5: strain preparation, plasmid insertion, controlled growth, induction, and initial filtration. The 6th stage was the secret. The clotting protein folded incorrectly unless the culture experienced a precise sequence of mineral pulses, temperature shifts, and micro-oxygenation during a narrow 27-minute window. I had discovered the sequence by accident after a faulty incubator cycle. In my first life, I wrote every detail in the red notebook Mara stole. This time, I copied the visible process into a new blue notebook and changed 3 values. None of the changes would cause an explosion. I was not interested in killing anyone. They would simply produce a useless, inactive protein that looked correct during standard preliminary tests. A beautiful failure. I stored the authentic sequence elsewhere. Not online. Vale controlled the university server. Not in my locker. Mara knew the combination. I wrote it by hand on the inside pages of a children's astronomy book my father had given me before he died, then placed the book in a sealed box beneath my mother's winter blankets. The next morning, my identity card stopped opening the laboratory corridor. I stood before the red access light and almost laughed. Vale had moved faster than I expected. "Problem?" a voice asked behind me. Dr. Nia Park, Director of Laboratory Compliance, approached carrying a clipboard and a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon. She was short, brisk, and famous among students for ending unsafe experiments with a single raised eyebrow. In my first life, I avoided her because Vale called her obstructive. Now I understood that obstructive was what dishonest people called women who kept records. "My access has been disabled," I said. She checked the card reader, then looked at her tablet. "Professor Vale requested a temporary welfare suspension at 7:12 this morning." "On what grounds?" "Emotional instability." I felt heat climb my neck. Did he provide evidence? No, she studied me. Did something happen? In my old life, I would have protected Vale's reputation because I feared appearing difficult. This time I took out my phone. I recorded our conversation yesterday. That was not entirely true. I had begun recording after he entered, but before he asked for the key. It captured my accusation, his attempt to remove me, and his demand that I surrender access to cultures registered under my project. Dr. Park listened without interrupting. When the audio ended, she held out her hand. "Give me your card." My stomach dropped. "Why?" "So I can reactivate it." 3 minutes later, the light turned green. Professor Vale cannot revoke project access through a welfare request, she said. He knows that. He was hoping the system would remain unreviewed long enough for you to comply. Can he remove me from the project? Not without documented cause and an independent review. She lowered her voice. But he can make your life unpleasant.
He already has.
Her gaze rested on my face for a moment. Back up your records somewhere he cannot reach. Photograph every inventory label. Use the sign in camera each time you enter or leave. And Elena? Yes. Do not work alone after hours. The words struck harder than she intended. I saw the emergency door, the glass, Vale walking away. I won't, I promised. That promise changed everything. For the next 4 weeks, I built 2 experiments at once. The first was the project Vale could see. I entered data into the university server, kept the blue notebook inside my locker, and allowed Mara and Lucas to observe selected runs. The cultures grew beautifully. The filtered protein appeared under every expected marker. Only the final functional assay failed, exactly as I intended. The second experiment lived in borrowed spaces. Dr. Park introduced me to Samira Bell, a doctoral candidate who managed a small teaching laboratory on the 4th floor. Samira was 27, permanently sleep-deprived, and incapable of pretending not to notice injustice. You're Vale's prodigy, she said when we met. Former prodigy.
Good.
Prodigies are exhausting. She pointed to an empty benchtop. You can use that station between 6 and 10 in the morning. Everything gets logged. Nothing radioactive. No mystery liquids in unlabeled tubes. If you break my centrifuge, I will bury you under the building. It was the kindest welcome I had received in weeks. I redesigned the process so it no longer depended on Laboratory 3's expensive equipment. In my first life, my obsession had been efficiency. After dying, affordability was not enough. I wanted resilience. A process that could run in regional hospitals, disaster clinics, and small manufacturing centers without $1 million reactor. The new design used modular cartridges, disposable sensors, and a hand-sized mixing chamber controlled by an open-source board. It was less elegant than the original machine. It was also harder to monopolize. Samira watched my first prototype rattle across the bench like an angry kettle. That thing is trying to escape, she said. It has ambition. It has loose screws. We both laughed, and the sound startled me. I had forgotten I was still capable of it. Meanwhile, Mara played the concerned friend. She sent messages asking whether I had eaten. She left tea outside the locked inner lab. She told classmates I was under pressure and needed understanding. Then she began collecting allies. By the end of March, people stopped inviting me to group study sessions. 2 students asked whether I was having a breakdown. A lecturer suggested I consider a lighter course load. Someone taped a note to my locker that read, "Science requires teamwork." I wrote underneath it, "So does a robbery." The note disappeared within an hour. Lucas was quieter. He watched me with the strained expression of someone standing on a railway track while pretending not to hear the train. Twice, I caught him outside Laboratory 3 after midnight. Both times, he claimed he had forgotten equipment. The third time I was ready. I had placed a tamper seal across the inner storage door and positioned a small motion camera inside my locker. At 12:43 a.m., the camera recorded Lucas opening the locker with a copied key. He removed the blue notebook, photographed every page, and replaced it exactly where he found it. Exactly where I wanted him to. The next morning, he leaned against my bench with forced casualness. "How's the assay problem?" he asked. "Still dead." Maybe the induction timing is wrong. Maybe. You should let us help. I turned from the microscope. Why? His throat moved. Because we're supposed to be a team.
No, Lucas.
You're supposed to be useful. There's a difference. His face hardened. You think you're better than everyone. I think you photographed my notebook at 12:43 this morning. The color drained from him. I placed my phone on the bench. The paused video showed his hand inside my locker. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he surprised me. He started crying. Not loudly, not theatrically. His shoulders folded inward, and he covered his mouth as though ashamed of the sound. Vale said he'd cancel my scholarship, he whispered. He said if I didn't prove you were hiding data, he'd report me for falsifying last semester's calibration logs. Did you falsify them? Lucas looked away. That was answer enough. In my first life, I might have comforted him. I might have confused pity with absolution. But I remembered him disconnecting the secondary vent. You disabled a safety system for him, I said. His eyes snapped back to mine. What? The event had not happened yet. I had spoken too quickly. I corrected myself. You would. That's what scares me. He wiped his face. You don't understand what he can do. I understand exactly. Then help me. I studied him. Here was the first true interruption in my plan. Lucas had been a villain in my final memory, but rebirth had returned me to a time before he committed the worst act. He was guilty of cowardice, theft, and fraud. He was not yet guilty of leaving me to die. The distinction mattered. Not enough to trust him. Enough to offer one door. Write down everything Vale asked you to do, I said. Include dates, messages, and the calibration logs. Send copies to Dr. Park and the Academic Integrity Office. Then withdraw from his team. Lucas shook his head immediately. He'll destroy me. Maybe. You call that helping?
No.
I call it choosing which person destroys your life. Vale or you. He stared at me with wet, furious eyes. Then he picked up his bag and left. That afternoon, the competition entry list was published. My name was not on it. Mara Voss, Lucas Pell, and Professor Adrian Vale had entered a project titled Portable Biosynthesis of Recombinant Factor IX. They had taken my blue notebook. They had taken my original title. And, according to the abstract, they had already achieved stable functional expression. I read the claim twice. Then I smiled. They had just entered a national competition with an experiment that could never start. I did not confront them. That was what they expected. Mara had prepared for anger. Vale had prepared for accusations. Lucas had prepared to deny everything. None of them had prepared for silence. I printed the entry abstract, highlighted every false claim, and carried it to Dr. Park. She read the title and exhaled through her nose. This is your project. It's the decoy version. Her eyes lifted. Explain. I told her about the altered values, though not the authentic sequence. If their listed process cannot produce functional protein, they will fail technical review. They've probably repeated my preliminary assays. Those will pass. The final demonstration requires live activity. I know. Dr. Park leaned back. You want them to reach the stage. I want everyone to see exactly what they stole. That is revenge. Yes. She seemed surprised by my honesty. I continued. It's also evidence. If I challenge them now, Vale will say I contributed minor early work and became resentful. Mara will produce the notebook Lucas photographed. They'll claim the process is theirs. But if I enter a working system based on a distinct design, establish my timeline, and let their copied process fail under controlled conditions, the difference becomes measurable. You intend to enter separately? I intend to win. For the first time, Dr. Park smiled. Competition entries had closed, but the rules contained an exception for institutional replacements when an accepted project faced a documented authorship dispute. Vale had counted on students never reading beyond the application page. Dr. Park filed a formal dispute, attached my original inventory registrations, and nominated my modular system as Blackridge University's independent entry. The committee granted a preliminary hearing. Vale arrived with a lawyer. I arrived with Samira, Dr. Park, and 3 storage boxes. The hearing room had no windows and an air conditioner that clicked every 40 seconds. Mara sat opposite me in a cream suit, looking wounded rather than nervous. Lucas kept his hands beneath the table. Vale's lawyer introduced himself, then spent 10 minutes describing collaboration as though he had invented it. When it was my turn, I opened the first box. Inside were dated purchase receipts, freezer logs, photographs of culture labels, access records, early drafts stored on my personal device, and videos of me assembling the original chamber months before Mara joined the project. Vale's lawyer barely looked at them. Professor Vale does not dispute that Ms. Serrano participated. Participated? Samira muttered beside me. The lawyer continued. The issue is whether her contribution grants exclusive ownership over a university's supervised team project. It began as an independent project, I said. Vale folded his hands. Elena, no one is trying to erase you. My vision flashed white. For half a heartbeat, I was back in the hospital, watching him thank Mara by name on national television. I placed both palms on the table. Then why isn't my name on your entry? Mara answered before he could. Because you withdrew from the team. I was never on your team. You became hostile and restricted access to cultures registered under my number. You left us no choice. There it was again. The language of people who called their decisions inevitable so they would not have to own them. The committee chair, a severe woman named Dr. Imani Cole, raised one hand. We are not determining ownership today. We are deciding whether both projects may proceed pending review. Ms. Serrano, can your entry be evaluated independently from Professor Vale's? Yes. Does it use the disputed reactor? No. I opened the second box and lifted out my newest prototype. The transparent cartridge system was no larger than a toaster. Mine is built for low resource deployment. Different chamber, different controls, different purification path. Mara stared at it. She had not known. Vale's expression did not change, but his thumb pressed hard against the side of his index finger. An old habit. He did it whenever a result surprised him. Dr. Cole examined the prototype. Can it produce an active sample during the live final? Yes. Vale's lawyer objected. Allowing a derivative project would prejudice our entry.
Dr. Cole looked at him.
A working derivative should not prevent an original from working. Samira kicked my shoe under the table to stop me smiling. Both entries were admitted. The retaliation began before we reached campus. My fourth-floor bench was cleared. The prototype had been moved to a hazardous material cabinet. Samira's laboratory access was suspended for alleged unauthorized research. Dr. Park received notice that her handling of the dispute would undergo administrative review. Vale had friends. He also had habits. Every retaliatory action arrived through university systems, creating a record. Dr. Park appealed. Samira contacted her doctoral union. I moved the prototype to my mother's garage and kept working between boxes of Christmas decorations and a lawnmower that had not started since 2019. My mother watched me solder a sensor board at the kitchen table. You haven't told me what happened, she said. I'm trying to stop someone from taking my work. Is that why you wake up crying? The soldering iron paused in my hand. I had hidden the nightmares badly. She sat across from me. You came home in March, looking like you had survived something. I kept waiting for you to tell me. I could not explain rebirth without sounding unwell. I could not tell her I remembered dying while she held my hand beside a hospital bed. In that first life, she had blamed herself for encouraging me to join Vale's laboratory. So I gave her the nearest truth. I trusted people who would have let me get hurt to protect themselves.
Her face changed.
Did they hurt you? Not yet. The answer frightened her, but she did not call it irrational. She reached across the table and closed her hand around my wrist. Then you do not go anywhere alone. I know.
No, Elena.
Say it like you mean it. I won't go alone. From then on, she drove me to every late test. She sat in the garage with a blanket around her shoulders and read crime novels while the cartridges ran. She learned to recognize the stable hum of the mixing motor. She labeled sample tubes in handwriting neater than mine. When the third prototype produced active factor 9, she cried before I did. The result arrived at 2:16 in the morning. I held the assay strip beneath the garage light, watching the color deepen into the range I had failed to reach for months in my first life. It works, I whispered. My mother looked up from her book. Of course it does. No, you don't understand. She stood and wrapped both arms around me. I understand enough. For 1 minute, revenge disappeared. Vale, Mara, the competition, even my death became distant. There was only my mother's shoulder beneath my cheek and the knowledge that this version of me had lived long enough to be held again. Then the garage door rattled. Someone was trying to open it from outside. My mother froze. I switched off the bench light. The motor stopped. A shadow moved beneath the door, blocking the street lamp for 2 seconds, then 3. The handle jerked again. I reached for my phone. Before I could dial, a voice called softly, "Elena?" "Lucas." I did not open the door. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk." "At 2 in the morning?" "Vale knows you built another system." My mother picked up the heavy metal torch beside the workbench.
How?
I asked. "Mara saw it at the hearing. He told me to find out where you were testing." "And you let him hear?"
No.
I switched off my phone 3 streets away. I almost laughed at the absurdity. "You want praise? I brought something." An envelope slid beneath the garage door. I waited before picking it up. Inside was a printed email chain between Vale, Mara, and a representative from Harrow Biologics. The company had promised Vale a consulting position and Mara a paid fellowship if their competition demonstration succeeded. One message referred to securing exclusive control of Serrano's optimization pathway. Another instructed Lucas to obtain the brass lab key so they could remove the original culture stocks before the authorship review. The final email was sent that afternoon. AV. If Pell cannot recover the key, Voss will do so at Thursday's safety inspection. Once inventory is transferred, Serrano has no physical basis for her claim. Thursday was tomorrow. I looked at the locked toolbox beneath my bench. The key was inside. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. Lucas's answer came through the metal door. "Because he told me the vent failure was going to be blamed on you." My blood went cold. "What vent failure?" "The reactor's secondary pressure vent. He wants it disconnected before the competition so the machine reaches the target range faster." I told him it was unsafe. He said the live run is too short to matter, and if anything happens, the maintenance record will show you were the last authorized key holder. The future was repeating. Different date. Same vent. Same lie. For a moment, I could not breathe. My mother unlocked the side door before I could stop her. Lucas stood in the driveway soaked by rain, his face gray with fear. She aimed the torch at his chest. "You have 30 seconds to explain why I should not call the police." He raised both hands. "You should call them." That answer saved him. We called campus security, Dr. Park, and the competition safety office. Lucas gave a recorded statement. He surrendered his messages and admitted copying my notebook. By sunrise, the disputed reactor was sealed pending inspection. By noon, the seal had been removed. Vale produced an emergency authorization signed by the university's vice-chancellor for research, a man who also served on Harrow Biologics Advisory Board. The Competition Safety Office accepted a private engineering certificate stating the reactor was compliant. The machine would be allowed on stage. Lucas withdrew from Vale's team that afternoon. His name remained on the official program because the deadline for changes had passed, but Mara replaced him with a postgraduate researcher who knew nothing about the project. Vale called Lucas unstable. Mara posted a statement about betrayal and resilience. Harrow Biologics threatened legal action over the leaked emails. I expected Lucas to disappear. Instead, he testified to the authorship panel. Cowardice had not vanished from him. He shook through the entire statement. He asked for breaks. He vomited in a rubbish bin afterward. But he told the truth. Sometimes redemption is not a grand transformation. Sometimes it is a terrified person doing one necessary thing before fear changes their mind. 2 days before the final, Mara cornered me outside the old laboratory. "You destroyed him," she said. "Vale did. You gave Lucas an ultimatum. I gave him a choice. You always make yourself sound righteous." Her eyes were bright with exhaustion. "Do you think you're innocent? You sabotaged the notebook. You wanted our experiment to fail. You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean." She stepped closer. Give me the correct values.
Ist sehr her.
For the activation stage, she said. Give them to me, and I'll put your name back on the entry. The offer was so insulting that it almost felt unreal. You stole my work, excluded me, and now you're offering to credit me if I make the theft functional. We can still fix this.
No.
You can still lose. Her face hardened. Vale says your little garage machine cannot scale. Then you have nothing to worry about. As I turned away, she grabbed my coat pocket. Her fingers closed around the outline of the brass key. For an instant, neither of us moved. Then she pulled. I caught her wrist. The corridor camera above us blinked red. Mara saw it and released me. You're sick, she whispered. I removed the key from my pocket and held it between us. This is what you wanted, isn't it? You don't deserve that lab. Maybe not. I curled my fingers around the key. But you're never entering it with mine again. I walked to Dr. Park's office and formally returned the key to university custody. She placed it in an evidence envelope, signed across the seal, then issued it back to me under the authorship investigation because the registered cultures remained my responsibility. For the first time, possession was documented properly. I had taken back my lab key. Now all I had to do was survive the competition. The final took place inside the Calder Convention Arena before 800 spectators and a live broadcast. 12 teams occupied separate demonstration bays arranged around a circular stage. My modular system sat in Bay 7 beside 3 sealed cartridges, an assay reader, and a photograph of the garage where it had been built. Mara's reactor dominated Bay 8. Vale had dressed theft in chrome. Before the doors opened, competition safety officers inspected every connection. One officer paused beside the secondary vent, checked the certificate, and attached a green approval tag. I photographed it with the time visible. Samira noticed. Expecting trouble? I'm done being surprised by it. Dr. Park stood behind our barrier with my mother. Lucas watched from the public seating, far from Vale. When he saw me looking, he gave one small nod. The live activation round began at noon. Each team had 30 minutes to initialize its system, produce a sample, and demonstrate function. Mara spoke first. Her voice was polished, confident, and almost identical to the presentation I had written in my previous life. She described the global shortage of clotting therapies. She described reduced manufacturing costs. She called the reactor our answer to unequal access. People applauded. Then the countdown appeared. At 10 minutes, their culture circulated normally. At 8, the temperature stabilized. At 6, Mara injected the mineral solution using the false concentration from my blue notebook. Lucas covered his mouth in the audience. At 4, nothing happened. The expected activity curve remained flat. Mara adjusted the oxygen control. The postgraduate assistant checked the sensor cable. Vale leaned over the console and entered a manual command. The chamber shuddered. A judge asked, "Is activation delayed?" "Minor sensor lag," Mara said. There was no sensor lag. At 2 minutes, Vale increased pressure. The green safety tag beside the secondary vent began fluttering. I stepped toward the safety officer. "Stop their run." Vale heard me. "Remain in your bay." "The vent is not releasing. It has been certified." The pressure warning changed from amber to red. An alarm cut through the arena. For one terrible second, everyone froze. In my memory, this was where Vale ordered me into the laboratory. This time, I slammed the emergency isolation button mounted between the bays. A transparent shield dropped around Mara's reactor. Power disconnected. Pressure discharged through the main exhaust with a violent hiss. The audience erupted into frightened voices. Vale rounded on me. "You terminated our demonstration. Your machine was unsafe." The reading was recoverable. A safety officer removed the green tag and examined the vent. His expression changed. "The internal valve is mechanically locked." Vale pointed at me. She had the key. Every camera turned. I reached into my pocket and lifted the brass key, returning to the moment with which the story began. Mara went pale. "Yes," I said. "I have the documented key issued to me this morning." Vale seized on it. Then she had access. No, Dr. Park stepped forward, holding the evidence envelope and access log. The reactor was transferred out of Laboratory 3 yesterday at 4:10 p.m. Ms. Serrano's key remained sealed in my custody from 8:03 a.m. yesterday until 9:15 this morning. The seal number is recorded. Arena footage shows the reactor arriving here before she received it. The safety officer looked toward Vale. Who transported the machine? Mara answered too quickly.
Professor Vale.
Silence fell inside Bay 8. Vale stared at her. She realized what she had done. The competition chair suspended their entry immediately. Technicians rolled the reactor away as evidence. Vale tried to follow, but Arena security stopped him. For the first time since I had known him, he looked ordinary. Not powerful, not brilliant, just a frightened man whose authority had depended on everyone else remaining quiet. My timer continued running. 9 minutes remained. Dr. Cole approached my bay. Miss Serrano, do you wish to withdraw after the interruption? I looked at my mother. She squeezed Samira's hand. No, I said. Start my camera. I loaded a fresh cartridge. My system did not gleam. It hummed. The transparent chamber filled with culture. The disposable sensor strip turned blue, and the controller began the activation sequence I had hidden inside my father's astronomy book. 7 minutes. The first mineral pulse entered. 5 minutes. The chamber temperature shifted. 3 minutes. Microbubbles formed in a precise spiral through the culture. 1 minute. I collected the sample and placed it into the assay reader. The arena became so quiet I could hear the machine's cooling fan. The result appeared. Functional activity, 93.8%. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then my mother screamed. Not elegantly, not professionally. She threw both hands into the air and shouted my name so loudly the nearest camera swung toward her. Samira laughed. Dr. Park covered her mouth. Lucas stood in the audience and began clapping before everyone else joined him. The applause rose like weather. I had imagined revenge as a sharp pleasure. Instead, I felt something loosen inside my chest. The dead version of me had spent her final hours believing her work would belong forever to the people who abandoned her. Under those lights, with my name filling the arena, I finally understood that I was not completing her life. I was leaving it. The judges awarded me first place. Vale was removed from campus pending criminal and academic investigations. The locked vent, emails, access manipulation, and attempted theft of registered cultures became more difficult to dismiss when examined together. Harrow Biologics denied authorizing his conduct and withdrew its offer. The vice-chancellor resigned from the company's advisory board 3 days before the university opened an external review. Mara lost her fellowship and was suspended for research misconduct. She sent me one message after the decision. You planned all of this. I replied once.
No.
I planned for you to have choices. She never answered. Lucas admitted his misconduct, lost his scholarship for 1 year, and repeated 2 courses. He also became the principal witness in the safety investigation. We did not become friends. Forgiveness was not a door I owed him. But when he later applied to a clinical ethics program, I confirmed that he had eventually told the truth. The prize included a licensing meeting with 3 manufacturers. Each offered money, prestige, and the same condition: exclusive ownership. I declined. With the award funding, Samira, Dr. Park, and I established an independent open-access research cooperative. Hospitals could license the cartridge design at cost. Improvements had to remain available to every participating clinic. My mother became our unofficial inventory supervisor because nobody labeled tubes better. 1 year later, our first regional manufacturing unit began producing trial batches. On opening morning, I carried the old brass key into the new laboratory. It no longer opened anything. Our doors used audited digital access, dual authorization, and automatic emergency release systems. No professor could lock a student inside. No single person could erase another from the records. I mounted the key in a small glass frame beside the entrance. A new intern asked why we displayed something obsolete. I looked through the laboratory window at the modular reactors beginning their first cycle. Then I thought of Mara on stage, waiting for stolen brilliance to obey her. I thought of Vale blaming the person he expected to be silent. I thought of the girl I had been, offering everyone access because she believed kindness and surrender were the same thing. It reminds me, I said, that access is not ownership, trust is not proof, and a locked door only protects you when you control who holds the key. The intern nodded as though I had given her a lesson in laboratory policy. Maybe I had. But when I touched the glass, I remembered the competition countdown, Mara's failing machine, and the exact second she understood. They had entered with my experiment. They had my title, my notes, my reactor, and every advantage they had stolen from me. They had everything except the truth. That was why it never started. Months later, a package arrived. Inside was the Navy competition blazer Mara had worn on stage. The metal pin had been removed, leaving 2 holes above the heart. Beneath it lay a note containing only 6 words. I thought winning would make me safe. I read it twice, then folded it back into the box. In my first life, I would have searched for hidden meaning. I would have wondered whether she was apologizing, asking for forgiveness, or blaming Vale. Rebirth had taught me not to finish other people's sentences for them. I donated the blazer to the university theater department. The box went into recycling. That evening, I entered the laboratory as the sunset painted every glass chamber gold. My mother waved from inventory. Samira argued cheerfully with a censor. A new student recorded her results under her own name. The door opened automatically. This time, nobody stood behind me waiting to take the key.